Hello, and welcome to our third panel of the Miskatonic Repository Convention. This panel is on history and diversity and how they can work together to improve your games. I want to thank our panelists. We have Antonio Marchena, Stu Sellens, um, Keeper Doc, Matt Tracey, and Keris. Oh God, I forgot your last name. Oh no.
McDonald.
McDonald, thank you. I didn't want to guess and be Scottish stereotyping. So thanks. See, all right. So part of this panel, we'll talk about how to remember people's names correctly. Um, thanks again for being here. We're gonna move fairly briskly around. We have some topics to cover. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll grab those and try to get to them as soon as we can fit them into the conversation. Really glad to see people here. Really glad to be with you, and I think it's being recorded. So if you're watching this in the future, you've got to get hold of some kind of time dilation equipment so you can send us a question in the past. If you are sending us a question in the past, don't tell us you're from the future because it'll screw with our timeline. All right. The first thing I'd like to do is go through, have the panelists introduce themselves and tell me in a minute or so or less, what attracts you to writing and playing in different historical eras, and particularly in kind of bringing out diverse viewpoints from those eras. And I guess we'll start with Keris.
Right. Hi. Yeah, I'm Keris. For those who don't know me, I am an associate editor for Chaosium, and I mostly do Cthulhu by Gaslight. So yeah, the two Gaslight guides are my baby. I've also done the Suit for a Pale Leaves 2 volumes as well. But Gaslight is where I concentrate and where I'm working at the moment. So yeah, I love history. I love particularly the atmosphere of the Victorian era. And I think the past is a foreign country, and that's what makes it so fascinating to be there. Human nature doesn't change, but culture changes enormously, and to immerse your investigators in these past worlds, to surprise them and frighten them with what you can do with that I think is wonderful.
Excellent, thank you. And Keeper Doc.
Oh, buddy, I'm Doc, one of many. If you know of any of us writing stuff, it's either one of the two of us or several. I write stuff for the Miskatonic Repository. I've got a number of projects coming out soon. The big one for print on demand, Lights in the Trees, which was a lot of fun to write in 1970s New York. And I got a second Karis's comment there about history being a foreign country, because that really nailed the perspective there, because I love writing about the different eras and learning about them because it's something unexpected. It's things that we may not know until we don't know. And then when you're writing something or running something, you learn something new about it. So it's kind of a two-way street. If your players get the horror that they never knew was coming, and you get an experience of learning something you may not have known happened at a given time.
Very cool, very cool. Thank you. And we'll come back to some of those ideas as well. Stu.
Hi, I'm Stu, producer of the Miskatonic Playhouse actual play podcast, and again, writer for the Miskatonic Repository. Again, big fan of history, which I think is a recurring theme of a lot of people who write for the MR. And as a lot of you probably know, that one of my favourite eras is the Regency era, of which I have written a number of scenarios for. One thing that drew me to Call of Cthulhu was the ability to play normal, vulnerable people rather than superheroes. And that's something that we see throughout history, is quite often the normal people are the names that you don't hear. You get the kings, you get the queens, you get the politicians, you get the lords, you get the ladies, you get the religious leaders, you get the, I've already said political, but the everyday person in the street, or the serf in the field, or the unnamed nun in the monastery, these are the people with the stories that are worth telling. And this is where we really can take Call of Cthulhu, create our own characters based on the everyday lives of the people that would have lived them, and really help to heighten that horror. I think it's more interesting to be a normal person thrown into the midst of it than the prime minister who has to deal with the political ramifications of the deep ones wanting to form an alliance with the Scots. That sort of thing.
Although it would be really funny to have, like, you know, Churchill governing by day and hunting the mythos by night.
Well, yes.
It would be really entertaining. And Antonio.
Well, hi everyone. I'm Antonio Marchena. I'm the entire staff of Scream Cthulhu Entertainment. And my modern scenario, The House of Flesh, somehow made it to the Year of the Goat anthology with Keeper Dog, for example. It's edited by Evan Perlman and Heinrich Moore, and I'm still wondering if they sent the invite to the wrong Antonio. In all honesty, I'm just a fanboy. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to share this panel with creators that I admire, and I'm really grateful. Thank you for letting me join the party. Oh, and why and how I do history. I like, one of my favorite things is the uncanny valley. It's something that looks so close to reality, so close to what history told us, but there's something under it. And those, Stu was saying, those characters that are on the other side, the what if, they were not the victors of the story. What is their side of the stories? That's how I use history when I'm writing.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and I think we've heard a couple of really good reasons from you and from Stu, you know, but for Doc and for Keris, is there anything you want to add about why particularly it's important to include diverse characters, diverse viewpoints? You know, what is it like? What does it add for you personally when you do it?
I think it's about honoring history because, you know, history was not made up entirely of straight white guys, despite what was written down. And there's so much out there, so many different points of views and different stories to tell, that, you know, it just makes it even more fascinating to bring things into the light, to share it with your players, to, you know, to find out for yourself. It's just endlessly, it's all the facets of humanity deserve to be put into games, and also, you know, and to honor in particular, you know, the struggles that people have had, you know, to be heard, to be seen, to have rights. That's part of the thing as well. You can't just sort of hand wave it away.
Yeah. And Doc?
Definitely. I gotta, once again, Keris, I feel like going after you is like, you say everything
sorry.
I'm going to say only better. You're doing a fantastic, because it's true. There's a lot of diverse stories to be told that, I mean, your comment of a bunch of just straight white guys. I was called out in a playtest for a scenario I wrote where I was told, hey, you did a great job summarizing the Vietnam War, except you got too many white guys. And it was recommended to me to pick up a book called Bloods, which is an oral history of soldiers of color in Vietnam. And I realized I was completely wrong. I had not only missed the mark of what the Vietnam history was, I was mistelling it, and ended up rewriting about 80% of the scenario, changing all of the characters to be more historically accurate. And it got not only made, for me, in my opinion, the scenario feel more real because you're basing it on people, but also more honest to history because, you know, you can say history is written by the victors, but at the end of the day, there's 1,000 stories not getting told because of that. And having the chance to tell those stories, even if it's through a game, is something people can engage with better rather than just sitting in a classroom. Because I as a college professor, we always say, after those 4 years, when are you going to take this class again? We can get somebody to learn something at the table by putting it in a little different satchel and handing it to them saying, hey, this is interesting. This is something you could be interested in more, but also there's a gug behind you and you're about to die.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, I want to then start to dig in a little bit. So we've identified, you know, a number of things that make it work for us. And I wanted to start to ask when you're as a writer or as a keeper, I think those are two different roles, but both have a really important part to play. What are some things that you do to help get that across at the table, right? Because we're not, at the end of the day, like we're not handing someone a history book and be like, here, read this and be enlightened, right? It's a game and an experience, and you've all mentioned really critical parts of that experience and how it can play into that. I guess we'll go with, well, I'll stick with you, Doc, since I'm looking at your face.
All right. So as a keeper, I find it important to work this in with. I'm a big fan of giving pre-generated characters, especially in a convention setting where you're going to see these people for maybe 4.5 hours and then leave the table, leave those characters behind. Putting something in there that indicates this is who you are as a person in this time period. I mean, to go with Stu's Regency things, putting notes in the characters saying, this is how you would act. This is what the expectation of society is for you, or how people are going to respond to you, versus throwing a book and say, hey, read this and understand what Regency is, because I've read the Regency book. I don't have time to read that in 4 hours for every time I run a game. But on the flip side, as a writer, I'm a big fan of putting in little boxes just to say to anybody reading it, hey, here's something you should be aware of historically. Because, I mean, to go back to that whole Vietnam thing, a lot of the names people think were colloquially used in the Vietnam War were rooted in very racist tropes. And I put a note saying, VC and Viet Cong should be the only terms you use, because the rest of these all have significantly racist undertones. And just putting that note, I actually had somebody say to me, they had no idea. They've always heard like, oh, such and such or so-and-so. I'm like, but when you look at the history a little bit, it's not as clean cut as you think it is, because we look at that history from the victor perspective of people said this because they won the war. Well, won the war being relative there, I guess, but it really just, from both sides, I find an open conversation with both the players and leaving enough notes that somebody who's reading something I wrote has that context without preaching to them.
Yeah. And Keris, I want to dig in particularly on the writing and the sort of scenario construction side, because you've done this really successfully in a couple of huge projects, right? The Gaslight, which, I think until very recently, every bit of Gaslight media that I've ever seen is the same kind of person, right? Both, white and wealthy, right? And there wasn't a lot of play on any kind of diversity, racial, economic, queer, or anything like that. And then I also wonder if this came up in Sutra of Pale Leaves, just because I think, there's a stereotype here that Japan is sort of homogenous as far as the kind of people that are there. And I don't know if it was as much an emphasis in the book, but I'm just interested in if that came up, or if people are playing that and want to kind of engage with that, what can be there for them.
So Sutra Palace is a slightly odd project in that it was sort of in collaboration with the Sons of the Singularity, who did, most of the work, and so they're all based in Japan. And this includes Japanese members, but also sort of Westerners who live out there. So they were very keen from the beginning that it was really important that people were happy that they could play Japanese characters, and that it was an easy in, and the background was explained. And including the sort of 80s stuff that, with some of us older ones forget that it might not be obvious, like pages and things like that, and very early cell phones. But no, the idea was that it would be accessible, but that you didn't have to play Japanese characters if you didn't want to. So the pre-gens that are given with that include a mixture. So, there were very definitely the case of, please feel free to play Japanese characters. It's not a difficult path into the scenario set, and that will do well. With Gaslight, I mean, that's because that's what I know best. We set out deliberately to widen the base away from just sort of middle or upper class white guys. We've done an awful lot of work. So for for people of color, for LGBTQ, for women as well, of course, because they would, although technically not a minority at the time, they're very much sort of economically and socially underdogs at the time. So we put in an awful lot of historical background about, what's the baseline? Well, how does the legal system affect you? And the actual historical background. But then we did lists and examples of people who broke the mold. And we thought this was important, that you got that idea that just because you are part of a particular group who are supposedly kept in a box doesn't mean that you have to stay there. We have loads of historical examples of people who have risen in the world, who have made their fortunes, who have self-educated, who have, we've got sailors from Dominica who come over and then become doctors and journalists and evangelists. And so there's loads of examples in the Victorian setting of people who do not conform to societal expectations. So you've got that there, and you can use it as inspiration, and you can use it as justification if you have to, for the sort of characters you want to play or the NPCs you want to make. So it was a really deliberate and conscious decision to widen the field, and that meant you could do so many more sorts of games, especially sort of really interesting one-offs. That are now open to people.
And I think we'll maybe come back a little bit more to scenario construction tricks and tools, but I want to highlight something really fantastic that I've seen in the Gaslight books, and I think I first saw in Chris Spivey's absolutely wonderful Harlan Unbound, which is that the scenarios are constructed with notes on how you navigate the world if your character is, in different groups, right? And I think there was actually a mechanic that your social roles, if you were trying to cross racial ethnic boundaries, were at a disadvantage because of the nature of the time. I think if I'm getting that wrong, I apologize, but it's something like that where there was a mechanical incentive to approach the world differently based on the historical avenues that were open to you. And then we're seeing that used in different ways in Gaslight with Reputation. Reputation, right? I think we got the right skill there. And really...
that came out with Regency originally.
Regency, sorry. Yeah.
And it's been adopted into Gaslight because it still works in a slightly different way.
Yeah, and so we'll come back to those kind of hard-coded things that can help people get into the mindset if they aren't comfortable or if they don't have the background yet. Antonio, love to hear your thoughts on kind of what, some things that you've done in your writing projects and your running of games. What kind of things have worked for you?
Well, I was born and raised in Spain, so for me, research was part of the job. Spain is really small. It's really different from everything around it. So if I want to write anything that is not Spain, it was going to be very difficult for me. So when I research, I need to see what the stereotypes are and how much of the stereotype I want to keep and how much of the stereotype I want to break. And these minorities that I'm going to include and these barriers that my investigators are going to face, how I'm going to research it from the lens of respect. Because again, even for me, 1920s is not something that we study at school in Spain. So I have to research absolutely everything. For me, world history is something I study more than US history or English history or the Netherlands history. So if I want to use a piece of history, I need to think about, okay, there's all this research of all these people that have studied this era. What do I want to keep? And what do I want to break? And that is what Keeper Dog was saying. Give my players enough information without swamping them. Because if you give them too much, it's as bad as not give them enough. And that's how I face it.
And Stu, I've worked with you on our Regency era project. How about you? What has worked for you so far?
So again, I completely agree with what Antonio's saying there, and heading back to Doc's notes on the pre-gens as well. It's taking the tropes, taking the stereotypes, and subverting them enough that they still feel real, but you're giving those characters agency. It's very easy, and we're going to go for a class element here. It's very easy to run a Regency game where you are an entire set of members of the Ton. You're going off to balls. You're looking for suitors. You're going off to country estates. But if you've got that one person who's playing that investigator of a lower class, they can very much be left out of the game. And ultimately, the game is collaborative. Everybody needs to have the chance to play.
And sorry, Stu, I just want to clarify, when we're talking about stereotypes, we're not talking about the stereotypes of the people, right? We're talking about stereotypes of the era, right?
Well,
the sort of common thinking that there
yes.
were not such and such, or they were not important, right? We're not
absolutely.
introducing stereotypes about people, right?
No.
Okay.
To a certain extent, I mean, to be fair, for NPCs, the stereotype of the rich lord who's out of touch with the people, that's fine. We can keep with
no, okay, right. But
no, I agree. It's the stereotypes of.
But I just want to be
the
clarified. We're not like, please don't throw really gross, racial stereotypes into your
not at all.
games.
Sorry, no.
No, that's okay. That's all right.
Should have been clear on that. Sorry. Yes.
That's okay.
So yes, it's taking those stereotypes, it's subverting them so that everybody gets a chance. This can be done with different races, different religions, different abilities. So I've recently written a Gaslight scenario where one of the key NPCs is visually impaired. Now, in the Gaslight era, there wasn't as much support as we have nowadays for visually impaired people. But I've been able to twist it around. I've been able to give her plenty of agency. She's actually probably the most key NPC in the entire scenario. And she's an independent character who's finding her own way. You've got to be careful that you don't take somebody with a characteristic like that and make them. You don't want to give it to suddenly it's their superpower. That can be just as problematic by raising it up, saying, "Oh yes, the only reason they're important is because of this thing they have." So it is a fine line to draw, but it's by giving everybody the chance to shine, regardless of preconceived conceptions of the societal background of the scenario. And I think that's the important thing. And if you can get that with, again, information boxes, representation in the core books are particularly handy. The Regency book, again, does a very good job introducing people of color, introducing the LGBTQ plus, which of course you built up on the Gaslight as well. So yes, subverting what you'd expect in that era, making it your own and giving everybody that agency.
Yeah, and I like, we've kind of talked about how you can build this into your scenario, into the written scenario, into the books. We've talked a little bit about how to do it at the table, and I want to pose a little bit of a challenge, right? So we'll pretend that we're sitting down at a convention table, right? You're with 4 to 6 people that you've never met before. 6 is too many to me, but I know some people like to have 6, but 4 and under for me. And you've got, a scenario from Gaslight or a scenario from Harlem Unbound or something like that. And so the people want to be there. They know what game they're going to be playing. But you have your own knowledge that you've gained from reading the scenario, and you have the pre-gens. What are you going to do in the course of this session to let's start with what will you do to kind of make the elements really sing together, right? So these are you have a richer text to work from. How do you help build a better game experience with that? And then later on, we'll come to the other question, which is helping people get over some nervousness about it. But we'll start on kind of the positive side. Keris, you want to go first?
I think it really depends on the individual scenario. You can't swamp them with enormous amounts of information to start with. But but you can introduce them gently. I think the answer is to drip feed information, and you can use int roles. You would know this as somebody who, in this particular field or part of society, you would know that. That can be introduced. It's so individual to the scenarios. I'm struggling to answer this one. So anybody else, please.
Sure. No, but I like that a lot. And that's, creating the drip feed, I think, is important. It's setting up a moment, right? Structuring how you run the scenario so that people have a little bit of a set piece, even for a minute or two, which lets them experience the different way of living, without like reading out a bunch of text like this is how life is for you. And that's a cool thing to do. And you can do that even if it's not written that way, right? Like you as the keeper can choose to zoom in on particular moments. So.
Oh yes. I mean, yeah, you want to start with a hook, don't you? In a scenario, it's not just a sort of. Hopefully, it will start with an interesting opening scene rather than just people sit around having breakfast.
Right.
If I can follow on from that, having
please.
that, I completely agree with what Keris is saying. Having an interesting scene where the players can interact with each other and find their characters. Having those conversations means that you can then make that int roll now before the scenario's even started. Get a bit more background. One thing that I saw at the UK Chaosium Con was one keeper, I can't remember their name now, but they gave their players the character sheets on the morning. Their afternoon, the game was in the afternoon, but they found their players, gave them the character sheets in the morning so that they could look through, have a look, and do a bit of a reading on the background so they knew what was going on. And actually, that will give you plenty of time if you wanted to say, well, actually, no, I'm playing an alienist. But let's have a little look into alienism in the Gaslight era and see where we can take it from there as well.
That's cool. Antonio, the keeper, the keeping at a convention challenge.
I at Chaosium Con USA this year, I was again fanboying around, and I had the pleasure to be in the same table with John Hook. John Hook run this scenario, Ice Like Balls of Fire. And what he did, I am not as familiar, again, with the Gaslight area. I just watched some documentaries, and of course I watched movies and I read books. What he did was sprinkle some flavor in his descriptions. And when he gave us the characters, the part behind explain what this character will act at a certain gathering. And my character was a lady from Indian descent that I pick up. I'm a math teacher and she's a mathematician, but it was nothing that I was expecting. But with John's masterful hints and flavor and what Keris was talking about, sliding me into the atmosphere and those little notes at the end, I was able to embody this character it's very different from me in an area that I'm not as familiar. But that made the whole experience for me very, very natural, very organic, and I thank him for that, because again, it was a challenge. Like, I want to be in the same table with him because I admire him as a professional. But now, how can I get into this area? And he did a great job.
Yeah, John is fantastic. Shout out to John wherever you are in the ether. He's fantastic. Doc?
So I also have a very similar kind of experience where a lot of my keeping style is cobbled together from many, many, many tables. And one thing that has stuck with me is a scenario called Friends of Dorothy. And if you ever read it or played it, you know that Mav did a fantastic job of creating a scenario that's accessible not only for people like the LGBT community, as it represents many, many, many facets therein in a time when the LGBT community was actively not doing so great societally. I hate to say it's very similar to the present day, but they did a great thing where they set up of how did this person help you avoid being outed as just a pregame discussion. There's a handful of questions, and it really put me as a playtester for it in the shoes of a character that I had no idea who they were. I am a cis hetero white male, and I learned more in those intro game questions of knowing nothing about the character. We got our character sheets about an hour before the playtest, and it was, how did this person protect your identity as a trans character? How did they help you to find who you are as a person? And just having that brief 10-minute discussion in a 4-hour game helped everybody immerse so much more than just, hey, this is who you are. I mean, there are notes on the back of, these are the issues you would face. But having the moment as a keeper, you always have like going on, especially the convention game, hi, I'm Doc, I'm playing so-and-so. Adding a moment where you can develop the characters organically. And I will say this, and Mav, if you watch this, please know that I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I have borrowed so much of my keeping style from watching them run games because it's fantastic.
Yeah, I have played in Friends of Dorothy. It was one of the most powerful role-playing experiences I've ever had. And one of the things, so it's funny when I was sort of reading it before Mav published it, I kept saying to them, I'm finding so much in here that I can relate to. I think because of the way they wrote it, and because of there's not just so the questions are great, and something that I really like. Some people that's a great part of their style, to have the sort of gentle intro questions about who are you, what's your background. But there's also a quiet opening scene. A lot of scenarios have this, right? And the scenario uses that time to give you a little bit of immersion in both the worries and the joy of to be found in the LGBT community in that time and place. And just from 5 or 10 minutes in the scene, and you're like, okay, I am centered in here. I know some of the good, I know some of the bad. And so I want to kind of transition into specific instances, if you can think of them, or general instances, if not, where the intersection of history and diversity really made a scenario more meaningful, more fun, more horrific. All of those things are possible. More, it's meant to add, not subtract, right? And I think Friends of Dorothy is a great one to open on, and I think would love to hear, either if you were a player, a keeper, or writing, other examples of those, and then we'll move on from there. But I want to dive into that a little bit. So if anyone has one in mind, yeah,
I got it. I got to jump on that because going with that Friends of Dorothy thing together again, it just meant so much that as a player, being presented a diverse historical aspect, and I don't want to spoil anything about the scenario, but I will wholly admit it took me 3 hours and 50 minutes to figure out what was actually happening as a societal level beneath the horror itself. And I walked away from that table shaking, because it's one thing to use history just for the context of, oh, it's the 1930s and we're making a film set, or, oh, it's Gaslight era and everybody's playing Oliver Twist, because that would be the stereotype everybody thinks of. And that's not what it should be. But embodying a diverse character at that table really sticks with you when you find out that using the diversity as something to add to it, you can deepen the experience and make it significantly more meaningful, rather than just saying, you're this person for 4 hours. Putting a personal connection to that diversity, what are the parallels between your experience and somebody else's that is vastly different? Like in the Gaslight era, thinking of, you always have the high society, as Stu and Keris have been talking about. What's your connection to somebody who's not high society? How can you embody that at the table? And getting that feeling as a player is amazing because it truly does dial up the horror to 11 when you realize, wait, this was relevant in the Gaslight era and today. And I just gotta say, Friends of Dorothy did a great job with it. I have to give it that shout out because that is one of those scenarios that has handled diversity so well to say that it rattled me to my core. And if you've ever played it or read it, you'll know why. I'm not going to spoil anything. But that's my go-to example because it just
it's a great one. Other thoughts, other examples, top of mind for anyone?
So not a Miskatonic repository scenario,
Sure.
but Bridget's recent Aurora Blue in No Time to Scream. Again, I think does this really well in a way that she presents people of color, effectively the black experience during 1930s prohibition, 1920s, 30s prohibition. And I've not actually played the scenario, but I've listened to Bridget running it for the Lightless Beacons podcast. And the little bit of a round table that they did afterwards as well, where Bridget encourages people to play. Sorry, that was a cat. It's not what you need when you're trying to make a point. The round table afterwards, where Bridget says to encourage people to take on these characters and to play these characters. And I think she made the comment that there are a lot of people out there who will feel worried about playing people of color, playing black characters, because they're worried that they're going to get it wrong. And again, Bridget made the very good point that if you come at it from a point of respect, you won't get it wrong. You can't get it wrong because you're telling these people stories, and the stories will naturally come together at the table. But as long as you treat the source material with respect, you're going to go far.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we'll talk. I'm going to save that for a little bit more because we'll talk more about how you help people get over that fear of getting it wrong. But I don't know, Antonio or Keris, if you have any examples.
Well, this is. Oh, I'm sorry, Keris.
No, you go first.
Well, this a scenario that I've run a couple of times is based on a real piece of history in Spain that is around 1950s. There was a guy called Manuel Blanco Romasanta that was accused and convicted of being a werewolf. So this gentleman killed 17 people, and he said that he killed them because he became a werewolf. And he was convicted, but my story was not the getting the werewolf to justice. It was before he was got to justice, the wives and the kids that have lost their families looking for them. So, and it was not the highest people in society. So it was the peasants in Spain. So there was a lot of research, but I made sure that my investigators didn't focus on, hey, these are people looking for the ones they love. As Stu was saying, go with the sign of respect and know that there's going to be a lot of red tape that you're not going to be able to cross. But there's still a lot of things that you can do in these ancient Galicia in Spain, in those mist-shrouded villages and forests that have nothing to do with your gender or your societal status. Is just interpret what a person that is grieving and trying to find these people is experiencing. So that's the closest I have run. I have Friends of Dorothy. I have not read it because I want one day to be able to have Mav run it for me. That's the dream.
Definitely do it. It's absolutely worth it. I have a couple of map scenarios that I'm like not reading because I want to play them first. But yeah, Keris.
I just wanted to say I would love to see more of these sorts of scenarios in print. Whether through the repository or through other avenues. We need to have more choices of this sort of thing, and really sort of deep storytelling that can move us and really teach us stuff. But I wanted to bring up, because I think it's a really significant movie that came out this year. Best horror movie of the year, probably the best horror movie in some years, maybe. Sinners, which I presume we've all seen. That is just such a prime example of how the diversity feeds into the story. It's not just a vampire movie about a bunch of people stuck in a bar fighting off vampires, which it could have been, but the fact that they used the history and every detail they put into the movie to tell little stories about the Black experience in 1930s in the Deep South, that just made it extraordinary. It's got such depth, and the stuff they brought in about the musical heritage and how also the Irish experience as well, and the ways that sort of reflects against the Black experience as well. And that's, just the depth in that movie, I think was brilliant. It's got so much to say, and I just love all finding out all about the details. I was interested in the car, weirdly enough, that the Smokestack twins were driving, because I was doing a thing about cars at the time, so I was looking up what car they were driving, and it turned out it wasn't Ford or anything obvious. It was Patterson Greenfield, which is the first Black motor company in existence in America. So somebody has sourced an actual African-American owned car,
That's cool.
vintage car from the time for the movie. I just thought, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
So, just there's so much.
and I want to pivot briefly just to, I guess, just exercise my moderator privileges and just talk for a second, because I want to point out something that Sinners did really well, that Harlan Unbound does beautifully, that other scenarios like Friends of Dorothy have done, right? Like, if I tell you we're going to play a scenario set around the Black community in the 1930s Deep South, people will tend to be like, oh God, this is going to be miserable and sad and hard, right? If we say we're going to play a game about the closeted LGBTQ plus community in the 80s, people will say, okay, I'm going to be prepared to be scared and discriminated against, right? I think people from outside the communities tend to focus on the trauma, right? And the prestige movies often do, what we call trauma tourism. And they're like, look how hard it was to be this person in this time. This sort of counter narrative that emerges and is emerging and is being promoted is find the joy also. It's, you hear people say like, don't just depict Black trauma, depict Black joy. I say you'll be shocked to know I'm Jewish. And I say the same thing about depictions of Jewish history. It's very easy to depict Jews as perpetual victims. Don't always, right? So in Sinners, the phenomenal music and party and dance scene, right? These are not a downtrodden people. These are people enjoying themselves and having love and community. In Harlem Hellfighters Never Die, in Harlem Unbound, it opens at a rent party, which is sort of a unique to the Harlem Black community of the time experience, but it's a joyful experience. It's a celebration. And I think, when you're ready to work these things into your scenarios and your games, don't just go for the downside of that experience. Put in, somebody asked, I think, Stu, you were saying to treat it with respect, right? And what I tell people when I run these games and they're nervous, I said, look, just remember that they're also people, right? So if all else fails, just be a person and don't worry about it, which means you can do things that people do, like have fun and go to the store and raise your kids and be mad at your boyfriend and all that kind of stuff. and so I want to really promote that, as we're hopefully everybody's moving towards this, is to normalize, the full diversity of the human experience here. And so I think now we've got about 10 minutes left. I know that a lot of people want to play. They want to write in the eras. They want to play the characters. But a lot of people, I think, out of a good heart, right, say, I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to do something insensitive. I don't want to stereotype someone. And I'd like to hear from you all, how you've kind of addressed that, what advice you have for players, keepers, writers to help people get comfortable stepping into roles in communities that they're not part of. So I guess we'll start. Keris, can I go back to you? Because I think you've done that the most explicitly in Gaslight and similar stuff.
Okay, so I think this is an occasion which is like a session 0 is actually really useful. It doesn't apply to in a convention setting, but if you've got a campaign going, you need to talk to people at the start about expectations, about what will be involved, and limits, and X cards, and all that sort of stuff. I'm going to pull out Harlem and Bad again, because honestly, if you're going to play African Americans in the classic Call of Cthulhu setting, you should be reading that anyway. It's not just about Harlem, but anything set in the Jim Crow sort of era. Yeah. And what Chris Spivey says is, don't be afraid to do it. But there are some things you need to be careful of. You shouldn't use racist language at each other in a game setting. It's not like a movie or a book where you're slightly removed from the action. He says, just don't use that sort of word at each other. And I'm prepared to absolutely take his word as law on that one. So you need to, and the other thing he says is, show you've got to know how far you're taking the hard stuff, the difficult things to deal with, sort of like sundown towns or police oppression and stuff like that. So I think that's something you need to sort out with your characters to start with, to what limits your game is going to go.
Yeah, and the session 0 setting limits really important. And I just want to add that it's also okay for people to say, I want to play that person, but I don't think I'm up for, the full hardness of the experience. And as long as you set that expectation ahead of time, that's great, right? You don't want to punish a player for the character that they choose to play. So if everybody agrees, we're going to kind of elide the nasty human part of this, that's your choice as a table, right?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I mean, that applies to all games of Cthulhu, whatever the setting, whatever characters you're using.
Yeah.
But, you are not there to abuse or traumatize your players.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Like if someone says, I want to play a racial minority, I do not want to experience racism in that game. Fine. That is our line for the game. Yep.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let me go on to Stu.
I think it's absolutely fine to traumatize the players, but as long as it's with the cosmic horror and not with the human horror. I'll say that now. No, I completely agree with that as well. In my mind, there are 3 different ways that you can run a game. You can run it with no real world racism, ableism, where everybody is equal, and that is a perfectly legitimate way of playing the game. It's a safe space for everybody to play, and you can tell the stories. You can play it with a balanced level of real world horror, in that it lies in the story. So a book that does this really well is Berlin the Witted City, because you have got the far right, you have got literal Nazis in the book, and they do get their comeuppance, which is good because that's what we want. But you can still feel safe playing in there with a little bit of antagonism. There is the third way, which I don't like doing, but I understand that some people do, and if it's agreed with around the table, and that's what people want to play, as long as it's done respectfully, it's fine. Where you do have the full, hard, full-on antagonism from society as a whole as well. But again, it's all about communication. If you're writing a scenario for the Miskatonic repository, you are producing a framework for somebody to run your game in the way that they want to run it. And having extra boxes of information, like Doc said, where you can say, this is what this person might experience at this time, this is how it can be presented in a respectful way, I think is the key thing that you can do. Whether the person running the game pays a heed to that, well, that's down to their table. But if you've provided it, you are giving them the tools to make the decisions, which I think is the key thing here as well.
Antonio?
I think for me is, what story do you want to tell? And what that's one side, but is what is the experience your players want to receive? And it's what Stu was talking about. It's all about the agreement. It's what do we want to embody in this scenario? Are we going to go a little bit more hard on, again, the word, the tropes and the stereotypes, or are we going to just focus on the story? But is communication is, okay, what do you want to experience? And there's some lines I'm not going to cross, because we're here to enjoy the experience. It's like having a hard time, having a good time, or having a good time, having a hard time. It's what do we agree to have in this table, and being honest. And it's not all about how extreme we can go. Is how can we as players and as keepers and as a community we can handle. And if we have that agreement, this is session 0 that Keris was talking about. For me, even those first 30 minutes in a convention, we need to establish some things, because I don't want anyone unhappy or anyone that is not comfortable at my table, or me in a table that I'm not comfortable. So if we are honest and we leave everything very clear and no judgment, just please be aware that something that is not a big deal for you can be a humongous deal for someone else. Just understand that, accept that, and just be this wonderful community that we all build.
Great, thank you. And Doc?
I mean, it's hard to. It feels hard to go last on these things. I feel like everybody else has said everything so well. But I got one last thing.
Next time.
It's kind of tipping my hand for something I'm prepping for 2026, but it's also interesting to see how something that's not necessarily on the repository, but a very iconic campaign that happens to start in Peru treats an interesting culture. I love sharing this story because my wife is an anthropologist. She studied anthropology in college. And I mentioned, there's this legend mentioned in a Peru chapter of Masks of Nyarlathotep where there are fat-sucking vampires. And I said, I started explaining, the book breaks down the history, all the folklore. She goes into the other room, grabs a book off of our bookshelf and throws it at me. She goes, I read this in college called Cholos and Pishtacos. She knew more about them than I would ever know, which really was amazing to me that we can see a lot of these historical aspects and superstitions brought in with respect.
Yeah.
Because the idea is like the Pishtako have, if you ever want to read about it, fantastic book about all the anthropological details of what went into the folklore there.
Cool.
And we as keepers bringing that to the table is always interesting to be able to play with that while still maintaining a high level of respect for the original culture it's coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know we're almost out of time. I want to drop 3 quick things. One, another sort of guidance from Chris Spivey and Harlem Unbound. Don't use accents. Don't use stereotypes, right? Play whoever you're playing, but talk as yourself. Trying to adopt an accent you're going to have a bad day. Number 2, I think this is an official rule for Miskatonic repository writers. Human evils are not the fault of the mythos. So if you are getting into some of these particularly bad times, right? Like I think the famous example is, like don't pin the Holocaust on like, an elder god, right? That's, people do their own evil things. They don't need outside help. It can, augment it, but we don't want to replace the human drive for it. And I think similarly, I don't think there's an official policy on this. But when you are dealing with myths of and legends and folk tales of other cultures, I personally feel a little bit squidgy when you're like, well, this culture's folk tales are really this this mythos entity. I know that used to be real popular. I think it's kind of frowned on now, probably rightfully so. If you want to be inspired by that and like do it, or if you want to use the actual thing, right? Not everything has to be an outer god. You can just say, hey, this is that folk creature. For really good example, I'm going to go back to Chris because I got to work on this project with him. But if you ever pick up Haunted West, it is full of everything from sci-fi monsters to Native American legends that are all sort of equally existent in this game. And they're sort of treated as their own entities. They're not, secretly a mythos entity. So that's really something I think we probably should have covered in more detail, in any detail, but we'll come to that another time. All right, so that was it. Let me run through the panelists, everybody. Just say where people can find you, and any last, 10-second thing you want to say. We'll go to Doc first.
All right. Yeah, I've been Doc. If you want to find me, I'm on Discord. The handle is Dr. Bones 412. I'm on, I think, almost every single Discord I can join, which is always fun. Seeing all the notifications popping up for when something goes live. I'm on social media with Instagram, Facebook, etc. Mainly the MR repository, the MR Creative Circle, things like that. We just dropped a cover for a new project coming out really soon, and I am so excited for this to finally come out because the other Doc and I conceived it almost over 2 years ago at Origins over some food at North Market, and now it's finally coming to fruition. So please check that out when it comes out. It's going to be called Where Dreams Take Root. And if you want to hit me up on Discord, anything like that, please do. I'm happy to chat with people about damn near anything. Oh, and watch Sanguine Arch on Symphony Entertainment.
All right, Antonio, we got about 30 seconds per person.
I'm sorry.
That's
Tell me
all right.
that.
Okay, so I'm Antonio Marchena. I'm in Discord as A Marchen in most places. My scenario, the House of Flesh, will be part of the Year of the Goat anthology, edited by Evan Perlman and Heinrich Moore, and using my publishing brand, Scream Cthulhu Entertainment, I'm going to release a scenario called Primetime Fear. That is my homage to Ghostwatch, and it will be released in 2026, hopefully. And this was a treat for me. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Keris?
I'm Keris McDonald. You will see my name on stuff coming out from Chaosium on a fairly sort of slow but steady drip feed. These things take time. The last things I want to say before I go is if you are playing Gaslight, watch 1,000 Blows, on the series on TV. Terrific and very inclusive and historically based Victorian stuff.
Cool.
So
I'll go
definitely
look for that. Thank you.
And for classic era Lovecraft Country,
Yeah.
worth
Yeah.
watching.
Stu.
I'm Stu of the Miskatonic Playhouse. You can find me at any Miskatonic Playhouse social on Facebook, YouTube, etc., or miskatonicplayhouse.com. I write for the repository. The main ones, of course, are Host and Hostility, Which One and Any, and Lost and Found, my train scenario, which is doing quite well as well. But yeah, just find me if you want to talk anything about trains, Regency, or just repository stuff.
Love it. Love a good train chat. I'm Evan Perlman. You can find me on the Miskatonic University podcast Discord or the Symphony Entertainment Discord or Facebook or Blue Sky. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to get us out before 7. This has been wonderful. I appreciate panelist Miranda. Thank you so much in the back for helping us. You guys are awesome. We'll talk to you soon.